Greetings! A very happy new year. Welcome to our show, Ghosts Are Near, where we discuss various aspects of the paranormal and paranormal exploration. As we start out a new year, I am your host, Keith Johnson, and I am the founder of New England Anomalies Research. With me is my co-host and co-founder of N.E.A.R, Sandra Johnson.
Hello there.
And N.E.A.R member Carl Johnson.
Happy New Year.
Glad to have you with us. Welcome, studio audience. And we have a very interesting show, a very special guest tonight. He's going to be quite a treat. During his past 35 years as a writer, Jonathan Thomas has also worked as a factory hand, artist model, manager of a recycling center, postal clerk, concert promoter, library technical assistant, comedian, and copy editor for medical journals and the Providence Art Club. His fiction has appeared in Fantasy Macabre, Ball Peen, Radio Void, Resistor, Symbol, and Radio Void Press issued a collection of short works, Stories from the Big Black House. He has composed and played keyboards and miscellaneous percussions with the Amoebic Ensemble, the Panic Band, and Septimania. So please join me in welcoming author Jonathan Thomas.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you.
Glad to have you with us, Jonathan.
Thanks very much for having me.
And Jonathan has come out with a new book entitled Midnight Call and Other Stories by Jonathan Thomas. This is quite a read. It's fascinating, a compilation of short stories. And I must also say you are somewhat, let's say, influenced by the Lovecraftian genre.
Well, I grew up here, so it's only natural.
And you do live in the east side of Providence, right?
I do. I was born at the Lying In Hospital in Providence on Smith Hill, and then grew up in Woonsocket, but after the 18-year interval, ended up back in Providence going to school. And I've been there ever since.
And you're not a paranormal investigator?
I grew up in a haunted house, but so the paranormal was investigating me.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to clear that up right off the bat.
Wow.
This is a switch for us.
Right.
So
That's how we usually
be an
start
interesting
out with,
night.
Yeah, our guests that are paranormal investigators, they often grew up in a haunted house, and that's what started them. So tell us about some of your experiences. Please do.
Well, a lot of it was just your basic, someone's knocking at the back door when nobody's there, and creaks and things that might just be your kind of ambivalent house settling, or maybe not. But there was one rather odd incident when I was very young. Actually, I'm afraid I have to add a little background to that before I can get into that story per se. My father, for some reason, when I was about 3 or 4 years old, I think, told me all about Dracula and then insinuated that he was living upstairs someplace.
Oh, really?
And that I couldn't find him by day, but that he would find me by night.
What a thing to tell a child.
and I eventually figured out that it must be he's in the spare bedroom.
Oh,
that's where he's got to be hiding, because it's the only place with the mysterious closets and strange bed. And at some point, my parents tried getting me to move into that bedroom, and I refused point blank.
After being told that Dracula resides there.
Yeah, so...
Were you a hard-to-manage child, Jonathan? Why did they tell you Dracula was up there? Why did Dad tell you that?
I think it was that odd Yankee sense of humor.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Apparently.
A little offbeat.
Not conducive to a child's sleep.
No, it wasn't, and I was prone to nightmares anyway. But after a certain point, they stopped bugging me about it. And then one evening, my mother was cutting my toenails in the bathroom, which looks out onto the hall, and my room is at the end of that hall. And as I was looking out into the corridor, I suddenly saw this sort of thing that seemed to be made of just like little wisps of smoke or feathers, about that high off the ground, and it was just drifting into my bedroom. And it didn't seem particularly threatening or anything. It was just something that was there. And I asked my mother what that was. What is that? I'm seeing something here. And She insisted that I was sick and I just wasn't seeing anything at all. And at that age, when I was sick, it was generally something like chicken pox or mumps, so
right.
I knew I wasn't sick. And only years later, my mother had been going to have another child, and there was a miscarriage right about that time. And that's why they were trying to move me into the other bedroom.
Oh, okay, all right, all right.
Ah,
So,
interesting.
I may have seen the little brother there just that one time.
Anything's possible.
Yeah, I had wondered if some of these stories might be based partly on reality. Now I guess I know.
Well, they're all based a little on reality, but not trustworthily so.
Yeah, I very much enjoyed reading this book, Jonathan.
Thank you.
It's got some fascinating stories, and I can't even say which one is my favorite because I like them all. Of course, I especially like the May Day Melee Explained, which takes place in Providence around the east side, and it has to do with the old tunnels that have, of course, closed off and everything.
Right.
And the narrator comes across this band of celebrants. I guess it's on Walpurgis Knot, and they're doing some kind of pagan celebration.
Right.
And they're all dressed one
on
dressed as
school
Hercules,
collegiate
right?
level.
Yeah. And of course the police come and they're doing those things. He adopts a little dog and everything like that, who leads him into it, and it's just pretty fascinating. And of course, you know, being native Rhode Islanders in Providence, we can really relate to this.
Well, that party actually did happen.
Oh, okay.
I was not living in Providence at the time. I was living in New York, but I ended up seeing a clipping about it.
Okay.
And that, you know, the little neo-pagan faction at Visiting at that point was trying to throw some sort of May Day's Eve party, little Elton festival or what have you. And eventually, I guess, it ended up in a police riot. And after that,
I've seen things like that on Halloween in Providence.
Right. Well, you didn't see them afterwards on May Day just because that was,
I see, yeah.
I think, the
So that's based on
only time. Yeah.
Quite interesting.
Loosely.
Well, I like your picture on the back, by the way. See that too? You look very mysterious there, I must say.
Well, thanks, I guess. My wife took that photo. Angel Dean
okay.
took
Well,
that photo.
compliments to your wife's photography.
Very intense.
Right.
That was the best of about 76 attempts.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're exaggerating.
Hiding in the bushes and other settings that didn't quite
And the
work out.
title, Midnight Call, of course, you know, I especially like that. And I've got to read a little excerpt here, a little paragraph. What could she do now but endure in silence for the rest of the dig? What could she say? She needed nobody's help, doubting her own sanity. At best, she could speculate on the nature of the beast, whether it had undergone translation into later Parthenons, or if she had struck the unwanted truth about Cupid and Psyche, or if here was something H.P. Lovecraft could have named. Now, of course, you struck a chord with Carl and I right there, you know, naming Lovecraft and name Hieronymus Bosch and everything. It's just so many things dear to heart to us.
Oh, good. I'm glad it's sympathetic.
Oh, yes, we find it very sympathetic. We really do.
In fact, the Lovecraft scholar S.T. Joshi wrote the foreword to the book.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about him and why you asked, or did he offer, or did you ask him?
Actually, I owe the existence of this book pretty much to him. Because at some point, a couple of years ago, I guess, March 2007, another friend informed me that he was giving a lecture in Providence, and it had been a few years since I'd actually found any markets for any of the material, and a lot of it had been pending for a few years. And I went to the lecture, and he had a rather sizable posse surrounding him after the lecture, so he was fairly inaccessible, but his lovely wife was willing to talk to me, and I just asked her for a business card, and she ended up taking the manuscripts off my hands. I had the nerve to print up a couple of things and just like going to present them as kind of a potentially very obnoxious thing to do, but she was very gracious, and a few weeks later he emailed me back and was interested in seeing a few more, liked what I'd shown him, and eventually, after I'd shown him a book's worth of material, he put me in touch with a publisher, Derek Hussey at Hippocampus, and to say, okay, give it a shot.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And as of a couple of months ago, there it is.
Oh. I was actually very impressed when I saw that the introduction had been done by S.T. Joshi.
What would you say is your favorite chapter of the book? And could you sort of give us a synopsis?
Maybe we should ask her any you
That's
don't
a loaded
like.
question.
Are there any you don't like?
Any stories that you wrote that you really don't like in there? So we can just skip
warn
over
us
them.
ahead of time.
Well, I like them all. Actually,
That's why I included them in the book. I think they're all excellent myself.
Because I didn't get to read them all, but I was.
I mean, did you have any particular favorites, or?
Well, the one that I really didn't have to skim through real fast was the first one, and Eben's portrait.
Eben's portrait, yeah.
Is Eben's portrait. It was very easy. I found it very easy to visualize myself as the painter, and I'm wondering if you could
Quite
sort
a
of
situation he gets into.
give our audience a short, a brief description of how that story went along.
Why is the sinister
Or maybe
Mr.
even leave them hanging.
Sinister Mr. Finster is sinister. Why is he sinister?
Because he just won't go away.
Right, but in Eben's portrait, that's the artist finds himself commissioned to do a portrait in an eccentric family, to say the least, and he finds that the model himself is kind of not what he expected. I won't give away the whole story, but
Just tell us the end, could you, please? Because I haven't gotten that far.
he freaks out.
No, Carl.
He freaks out at the end. But you've been a model yourself, an artist model,
Yeah.
which I can relate to in another one of the stories, of course. That's very interesting, and now that I realize you can relate to being an artist model and how that might
Though
fit
I
in.
haven't, that phase of my so-called career was a few years in the early '80s,
Okay.
and that story came out of that, but not
I see,
for some years after that.
I hope it didn't have the same results as in the story, because that would be
But
quite
apparently
traumatic.
not.
Right, yeah, exactly. You can play the piano still, the keyboard. You wouldn't
couldn't
be able
before,
to.
but
Right, yeah. Yeah, the fingers of stone. And, do you ever do the discus thrower there?
No.
No, you never know.
No, luckily not. No,
Okay.
no, you do learn very quickly all about gravity and muscle strain and what you shouldn't try to hold for more than 5 minutes.
Right, exactly. I think even like a jockey, lawn jockey, that would get kind of painful after a while, holding a lantern for a
That
while.
would be the Spanish Inquisition after about 10 minutes.
Right, exactly.
Besides, they're not politically correct at all anymore.
I think a very interesting story, especially, is In the Wake of Bridget. Of course, again, it goes into ancient pagan beliefs and a creature that is not quite what she seems at first, and she has different incarnations. And but the way of her intended expulsion or disposing of her is something we can relate to too, because it's very similar, as I'm sure you are aware, of dispatching of vampires in New England. Disrupting the corpse, beheading, disemboweling, and just making sure that they can't get up to do their dirty work.
And interestingly, though you think of that as sort of an 18th and 19th century New England remedy, it seems to have had precedence in 6th century England, in very early Anglo-Saxon England, because they found graves that are jumbled in pretty much the same way. Whether it was vampirism or witchcraft that they were apparently reacting to.
Right. Well, we New Englanders had to get it from somewhere, right?
Oh, yeah, and Old Englanders.
Right.
We need to do some research for your New England vampire lecture
that's
on
very
that.
interesting, very interesting. Of course, a lot of people back then like to blame the Indians, but as our friend Michael Bell says, they were scapegoats for everything.
Right.
Right. Including smallpox, which we brought across. And,
So there is a nebulous core of actuality to many of your stories.
Right, like in the Wake of
Predicated on
Bridget,
something.
there had been a winter like that, a winter that just lasted all year in 1816.
Right. The summer that never was.
Though now I think that's being blamed on a volcano in the South Pacific.
Right.
Somewhere in the neighborhood of Krakatoa. But maybe Bridget made the volcano erupt.
That could be.
Who am I to say?
Madame Pele in Hawaii, so.
So you were also a comedian for a time, or you still are?
Maybe not intentionally.
That's the best way. I think that's the best kind.
I mean, there was a point at AS220 in the late 80s and early 90s when I was doing some emceeing and some found objects, like prop comedy. Basically prop comedy, and those...
Oh, so you were the precursor to Carrot Top. He owes his career to you, right?
I think Ellen DeGeneres might have been doing... She did lie-down comedy, right? She did some kind of
yes, right.
deal, and yeah, I had come up with, I mean, I'm sure she thought of it herself, but I did have an evening at AS220 where several friends wheeled me out in a bed, and I just let people know that I was fed up with stand-up, and from now on it was lie-down comedy.
That's pretty neat.
And that went over pretty well, but...
Jonathan, two things not listed in your panoramic resume. You were never an astronaut nor an undertaker.
Well, just because it wasn't listed,
undertaker.
you need to...
Amateur undertaker?
Yeah. Just burying
Or deep-sea explorer. You haven't done those. Yeah. You may have dabbled in those, but you haven't done them professionally.
No.
No, it'd be easy to ask what you haven't done.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm speechless.
That's when he comes back. That's, you know, things Jonathan has not done. Shouldn't take as long, though.
I'll just support the writing habit.
Right. So you may be distantly related to H.P. Lovecraft and Roger Williams, as are Carl and I, too.
Well, I'm pretty definitely related to Roger Williams, and whether that means I'm related to you and H.P. Lovecraft, I guess, is for better genealogical minds than my own.
Well, it's a very small state here, folks. We're all related in one way or another. Right, Carl?
I think we do have a
Let's
common
hope not.
common antecedent somewhere way back there. We've got that Caucasian thing going on, you know. We join up at some point. Back in
I
history.
suppose we do have that in common.
My cousin.
Now,
It ends there.
Of course, Carl has a lot to do with keeping the memory or celebration of Lovecraft alive, too. And I think you two had that in common.
Yeah, did you realize that you had met?
No.
Before
No, we
tonight?
hadn't met. I'd attended a few of the events, one in Swan Point and one last spring at the observatory, but I didn't really feel I had any...
You didn't approach
I didn't have anything
Carl.
to say, you know. I didn't want to
Oh,
bother
that
when you're
doesn't
in the
stop
middle of-
anybody at those affairs. You could have come forward. Yeah.
Well, next time I'll annul you.
Please do. But I was going to ask you now, you don't use specific locations, more generalizing. H.P. Lovecraft, I don't know if you've been somewhat influenced by Lovecraft, perhaps. You couldn't help it growing up on the east side of Providence. Lovecraft was fond of drawing upon actual locations and employing them on it in his stories. You know, locations in New York, in Boston, in Providence. Now, even though you don't use addresses, precise locations.
Use Tillinghast Street.
Oh, there is a Tillinghast Street, that's true. Yeah?
Though actually that Tillinghast Street is a fictionalized version of another street. You mean in
Right.
Mayday Millay.
Right, Mayday Millay, yes.
So it's not the real Tillinghast Street.
No.
No, but I knew there was a Tillinghast Street.
But have you been influenced by Providence, by the architecture, by the old streets,
definitely.
by the history?
Yes.
Yeah, I can tell by reading the book that there are many references that you can actually, you know, being native Rhode Islanders, we can...
With
very
some
much
insight,
relate.
if you grew up in this region or have spent some time in this region, you can kind of allude to what he's talking about, where he's talking about.
Right. Now, have you ever attended some of the tours that go on in Providence, like, say, the Lovecraftian tours, or you've attended the celebrations? And
I had gone on one that was sponsored by the Historic Society some Halloweens ago. And I've given a few of those tours myself just to friends who are coming in from out of town, or in one case friends of S.T. Joshi's who are out from Seattle.
Right.
And in lieu of any official tour guides.
How about Night Gaunts? Had you heard of that, or did you go to see it?
I was living in New York at the time, so I hadn't gone to see it, but strangely, Derek Hussey, the publisher of the book, handed me a CDR of an audio version of that.
Okay, so you are very familiar with it. That's neat. Okay, now,
And that's Brett Rutherford, right?
yes.
Brett Rutherford authored Night Gone, so I was privileged to play the role of H.P. Lovecraft in that performance.
And it's a startling likeness.
Thank you
Seen a
very
photo.
much. Well, I based the makeup and the contours, the shadowing, on photographs of H.P. Lovecraft. Just kind of elongated my jaw. So, achieved some
Classic
resemblance.
lantern jaw, so-called.
The lantern jaw.
You can kind of stick your tongue in it.
When I smile.
Sort of.
Exactly, that's right.
Now, Keith's going to read us a story from your book, I believe.
Well, not the whole chapter. I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but
Would also take
We only have a
long
half
time.
hour, Keith.
it will take a long time. We need another hour. But Some Days Before Shadow Damsel. That's a very, very interesting story. And that seems to be the, again, the narrator, it's his own psychosis gradually working into the story. And he's, can compare it in a loose way to The Raven, where he's driving himself crazy. And he's expecting this, being a lonely bachelor, and dominated by his mother, who suffers from all phobias and eccentricities, and he's actually seeking some escapism himself through the shadow damsel, which he sees in various things, the shower curtain or the clothes he's draped over the chair or anything. He just sees in the folds, and it's becoming more and more tangible to him. And then you're led to how actually real is the shadow damsel, and you're left to guess that until it builds and builds. So I really enjoyed the way you did that.
And the hill that the story is set in is based on an actual hill where a lot of my relatives lived, place Blackstone. It was Pickering Hill in Blackstone, Massachusetts, which was at least legendarily known for a lot of ball lightning.
Okay, yeah,
on
because you do
summer
describe
nights.
the ball lightning in there.
And apparently it chased people around.
It will do that sometimes. But does it have the actual cemetery there adjoining the property?
There's a family cemetery in the area, but it's not exactly geographically accurate, but it's roughly there.
Right. I think what's we can relate to the characters in your book. They're so sympathetic because we see some of ourselves in them, a lot of them. You know, we all have that side of ourselves where we're just not going to go the way of society. We're going to go our own way and come what may upon us and everything. And but getting back to Fingers of Stone, that is very interesting, and that goes more and more into kind of the romance story, and you want it to work out. You really want the romance to work out, but for some reason it didn't, and you really are drawn into it. You want to know why, and that's a very surprising plot ending there. You know.
Well, I'm glad it is.
Yes.
I'm glad it is.
Yeah, I was not expecting that till the end. Wow. You know. So, but very, very, very fascinating stories, and if you want to read them before going to bed at night, and you want to stay up a few extra hours, I think they will, you know, if you're sensitive to the chills of the night, sometimes these stories are the kind that will really, really keep you awake, and gee, I'm not ready to go to bed yet. I think I'll read another story, you know, because they do kind of put you on edge.
So they're really not good for getting a good night's sleep, you're saying?
No, not really.
Well, that's very flattering.
Well,
Right.
then they're successful. That's your intent.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. No, because you really want to see what happens to the characters, and you're, gee, you know, heaven forbid that could be me. That's how it makes you think, and that's intentional, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Can I just ask, and I don't know if we can get a close-up of the cover illustration. Could you tell us about that? Why you chose that particular picture, and is it representative of one of the stories?
of nothing in particular, but the publisher came up with the illustration. He had commissioned the artwork, and it's someone who's actually done some more closely Lovecraft-related work as well. A beautiful picture of the shunned house on Benefit Street.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. I can see that.
And it's kind of a shunned house-looking doorway, so it's just a general.
Yep.
I'm almost like an EC horror comics cover with the framework of tendrils and
Yes. Yeah.
and things you wouldn't really want to touch.
Things you would not want to touch.
Certainly an ominous-looking door, and it
Not without
suggests that
latex gloves on. Right.
if you go through that door, there may be no return.
Right.
That's what it says to me.
2 Lovecraftian-themed works in progress that you're collaborating on, Cthulhu Rising and Color Out of Space. What can you tell us?
Well, there's a filmmaker and musician in Providence named Frank Difficult, or Francis Bisogno, to use his non-stage name.
I like that, Frank Difficult.
And these have been pending for a few years now. I don't know when we're actually going to pick them up again at this point. But Cthulhu Rising was going to happen about the same time that another set of filmmakers actually came out with the Call of Cthulhu silent version. So we put that on hold for a while. And Color Out of Space would be an attempt to film something that everyone considers unfilmable, though there was that Die Monster Die in 1965 with Boris Karloff and Nick Adams.
See that. Yeah. Nick Adams?
So we have a script, and taking it from there is a huge leap, but things happen.
Right. Well, the Lovecraft works, just the nature of them, are very, very difficult to put on film accurately. So I'd really like to see that portrayal. I really would. So in our last minute, tell us what's ahead for you, Jonathan.
Well, impelled by S.T. Joshi's encouragement, in the wake of this volume, I've written another 80,000 or so words that should be coming out from Hippocampus in a couple of years, and that collection might be called Tempting Providence. And there's actually the story per se, Tempting Providence, with any luck, will appear in an anthology that S.T. Joshi is putting together of Lovecraft-related short stories. So it's kind of a sequel to Haunter of the Dark.
Right.
Where there's a sinister church on Federal Hill from which the Starry Wisdom cult practiced the usual unspeakable rites in the 1800s. And this sort of takes it from there based on an anecdote I'd heard when going to school about someone who claims to have seen the ghost of H.P. Lovecraft in the List Art Building on the Brown campus.
And that was the site of his last residence before 66 College Street was moved to 65 Prospect Street, where it now sits.
So one can only imagine how upset Mr. Lovecraft would be to find his nice, cozy living room suddenly replaced with the gallery.
He resisted change. Resisted death for a while, but really resisted change.
The spirit of H.P. Lovecraft has actually been spotted in different...
There, 10
occasions.
Barnes Street on the east side of Providence, and in the Ladd Observatory. He's been rummaging around there.
He gets around.
Well, in our last 30 seconds or so, Sandra, would you like to give some of our contact info?
I can do that, I suppose. We actually have a new email address that we would like to pass around, and there you go, N.E.A.R Case Manager at inbox.com. For any of you that would like to contact Renee Smith or Lisa Dwalaby, our case managers, that would be the direct contact for them. You can also contact our newest case manager assistant, Nathan Mayer, at that address. You can also still reach us at ghostsarnear@cox.net.
Excellent.
Want to be a guest or have any questions, give us a shout.
And thank you so much, Jonathan, for being our wonderful, wonderful guest. It's been fascinating. You've got to come back.
I will.
I know you
will.
always have works in progress, and we very much want to hear what's going on with you.
And there are a few anecdotes related to the show that I did not get to.
Well, next time. Next time.
We'll do an anecdotal
All
show.
right, here we go.
Thank you very
All
much.
right.